is not linear. I'm thinking about this after listening to, once again, the IMO podcast with Michelle Obama and her brother Craig Robinson, and they're talking about the passing of their mom. She died last year, and, not grieving a parent alone. And it's more to it than sort of that. It has all of these layers around talking about death and talking and communication within households and between parents and children to sort of prepare them for the absence of, a mother or father, or both. And there was a person who wrote in talking about how her father, with whom she was very close, passed. He had died after a 2-year battle with cancer, and how her mother started dating shortly thereafter, and her brothers just sort of took to their own families. And she's wondering about, how can people just move on, basically? How can you start dating so quickly after? Or why did we go from being this close or seemingly close family to now it's like I'm all by myself? And I thought, grief isn't linear. Of course, I work in grief because I work in palliative care, and I know how varied it is. How it isn't an A through Z, 1 to 10 linear process, and how grief manifests and is processed differently with different people. And so often we look in on other people and we lead with a should. They should be doing it this way, or they should not have done that, or how could you, or what about this, as if we know the fullness and totality of that person's experience, as if we know all of the ways that they are sort of in battle with themselves, if they are, or that we have the answer to what it should look like for someone else. And we don't. And it goes back to communication. We so often go around the building and we wonder about the behaviors of others. And for some reason, whatever that reason or reasons are, we do not go directly to the source and say, I want to sit with you and talk with you about my grief and my process. Or maybe I don't even know my grief and my process, but your way is triggering me. I want to be curious. I want to access curiosity rather than judgment and criticism. I want to know how you're doing, thinking, and feeling. And maybe there's something in that I can take and use for myself. What is it about loss that really disrupts like a peaceful vibration? Families become easily torn apart. What was once seemingly close is just completely shattered, distant, abrasive, combative. And if money and property are involved, then that can open up a whole thing. And beneath it all is suffering, right? Beneath it all is pain, maybe even some trauma, some things long held on to, preventing us from going to the source and sitting beside another on the couch and leaning into the curiosity of, tell me about you and your experience. Because grief isn't linear. To love is to grieve. To open our hearts is to grieve. And if we are not sort of prepared for the inevitability of one's exit, then we may forever be lost in their absence. And how do we process that? My father died suddenly when I was 28. It came out of nowhere, and when I say it came out of nowhere, along the way there were some things, but still it came out of nowhere, right? It wasn't like there was anything leading up to it happening when it happened. And I remember growing up, I thought if I ever lost my father, if my father died, I would be destroyed. I'd not have the ability to keep going. And what I learned in that moment in time is that that wasn't true. That all of the love and connection that he and I shared was far too important to lose myself in the grief. I could access the grief. I could cry in moments where the grief came like a wave, or when I reflected on who he was and our time together, or when I had to call various accounts and say again and again why I was calling, and then I couldn't finish the conversations because the grief would overtake me. I could feel the fullness of the feelings without falling and succumbing to the potency of it all. And that was my way, right? My version of grief was to face it, to write about it, to look at pictures, to almost poke at the tears, because I didn't want to let them go. I didn't want to skip a beat. I didn't want to fast forward a feeling, but I wanted to feel it fully. And with that came a period of panic attacks and sleepless nights as I moved through those dark nights of loss and disruption and disturbance and absence and angst. But for someone else, it could be that they turned away from it, that they didn't poke at the feelings, that they did not open Pandora's box and reflect over maybe disappointments or, things that went missing or wrong, disagreements. Maybe someone else chose to disregard it or date, move forward, be with relief. Grief isn't linear. And what I know is that we don't have the answers to why people grieve how they grieve or how, but we do have the ability to be curious, to care enough to be curious, especially if our desire is to connect. Like that particular person who wrote into their show or called into their show. We can turn toward those we love, be it a parent that remains or siblings. We can turn toward them with curiosity and wonder so that we can understand and hopefully connect. But we do ourselves a disservice when we stop at judgment or we fast forward as if we know, or if we just feel like the shoulds and the shouldn't. Because grief, it's a real thing, and it's a non-linear thing. And unless we choose to pause and really have those very emotional and touching and heated even conversations with people about how they're handling or holding or navigating or processing their grief, we will be left there in the dark. We won't know. And when we don't know, we cannot connect. And so then we feel a deeper grief. Not only did we lose the person who has left this life, but we lose the people who are just within reach because we haven't turned to extend our hand in reach to know. So I'm thinking about grief. And I'm thinking about the many layers of it. And how one person's perceived way or perceived timeline of when something should happen next may not mirror the truth and reality of another. And so what do we do with our inability to hold that because we just don't understand it? What do we do with the pain of another person's way of processing a shared grief? And I say shared because if we're siblings and we lose a parent, we both lost that parent, right? It's shared. And yet the manifestation of the process will likely be different. How do we hold that? What do we do with our grief and our thoughts and judgments and perceived notions and ideas about how it should or shouldn't be? So in this moment, I just want to remind us that we are not exempt from grief, that communication is key before, during, and after grief, and that if we find ourselves facing someone or someones who may be navigating grief in a way that rubs us the wrong way or that we don't understand and it causes us to have judgment and criticism, that we do the harder thing by tapping them on the shoulder and asking if we can sit beside them and learn their way and understand them. Because guess what? You may be the only person asking. They may need your inquiry, or perhaps you may need the inquiry of another. I want to encourage us to hold grief with spaciousness and presence, and to dare see it through vast and wide eyes, a lens that is beyond even our ability to conceive it, because it holds the possibilities of the all, even when we don't understand, even if we fear what may rest underneath it. Because grief isn't linear, but it is something that we will all experience. Be it the loss of a loved one, someone we know, or be it the loss of something we just needed in our lives. You know, something you may have just needed and never got. Some of us will grieve for a lifetime for things that just went missing. May we have compassion and presence and love for our grief, and for the grief processes that we do not understand. May we have compassionate curiosity and open the door to clear communication, that we seek to understand, and through that understanding, connect. Yeah. Grief isn't linear. Not at all. And on that note, I thank you for your ear and for your presence and for being able to listen to the weighty things that exist in this human lifetime of ours, to peel back maybe superficial things to get to the depth, to be curious about what's there in the deep end of the ocean, and to explore ourselves fully. So thank you. I appreciate you. I do, I do. And I hope you come back around next week. Until then.